This is the Blind Grilling Experience, and I am the most interesting griller in the world. Welcome back to the Blind Grilling Experience. If this is your first time joining us, we certainly do appreciate you taking the time to listen to the podcast. We'd appreciate if you subscribe, you like, you share, all of that great and wonderful stuff that helps us to get out there and spread the word about what we are doing. And of course, you can always email us if you got questions, you got some thoughts, things that you want to ask about blind grilling experience, about blindness, visual impairments, about grilling, barbecue, cooking, or any other blind-related or cooking-related topics. We'd be happy to talk about that. Even outdoors. You love fishing and hunting. So do I. And so would love to talk to you about that. blindgrilling@gmail.com. That's the email address, blindgrilling@gmail.com. And I've got a couple of things that we're going to be talking about today I want to share with you. And one is a very popular subject, which is brisket, the king of meats, man. I tell you what, a lot of folks ask us about our brisket. That's one of our most requested dishes or meats when it comes to the catering that we do. When folks are wanting us to supply food, bring food to cookouts or potlucks or whatever, we're always asked about the brisket. And so I was going to talk about that just a little bit. But before we get into the brisket itself, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about masks. I know everyone has probably got their thoughts, their opinions, and I'm not going to talk about legalities or moralities when it comes to masks. I'm not going to be talking about, whether you think everyone should wear one or you think it's, against our civil rights to be, forced to wear one when you go to stores. You're not getting into all of that. But what I do want to get into is the effect that it has on those who are blind or visually impaired. And you might think, well, what kind of effect would it have on someone who can't see? You're talking about putting something over your nose and mouth. You can't see. It's not affecting vision or anything like that. Well, the problem that I have run into personally is, besides any type of claustrophobic feeling that some people get from it, not being liking something over your mouth or nose when you're breathing in and of itself, there's a lot of other senses that are affected by not only you wearing a mask, but others around you wearing a mask. Think about this for a minute. I personally rely so much upon not only my hearing, but my sense of smell, and also just the feeling on my face when it comes to wind, direction, things like that. Sometimes feeling the sun. If you're walking in a city and, if there's a breeze that comes, it hits you in the face, you kind of know between buildings or at a corner. There are certain little things that you pick up on. And sometimes having something blocking your face really affects knowing where you are in certain situations for those who are blind or visually impaired. Not only that, not only relying upon, perhaps smell that can be obstructed depending on the type of face mask that you're wearing, but also the way people sound. My family and I went to a restaurant for lunch, and the waitresses are all wearing their masks. The hostess was wearing a mask, and I couldn't understand a word that they were saying. It muffled so much the noise. And then when someone would come and say something, even across, a table over, I couldn't tell if they were talking to us or someone else when they were asking what our drink orders, if we want something else. I couldn't understand what they were saying. And then when going to church, it was difficult. Normally someone comes up when they begin to speak. I recognize their voice. I know who they are. But with the mask, it's a lot more difficult to know who it is that's talking to you. And granted, there are different types of masks, and some masks aren't as bad. Sometimes, you can still tell who is talking, but sometimes you can't. And that creates some uncomfortable situations at times where normally it wouldn't have been uncomfortable. And so those are some, just some things that I think a lot of folks don't think about with some who may have objections to the masks, not necessarily because they believe one way or the other of whether or not it's helpful or harmful to wear the mask. But there are a lot of other issues that I think go untalked about. They're not discussed, they're not brought up, and they're not considered. And for the blind and visually impaired community, it is something that I think is pretty serious. And that's just for the blind and visually impaired community. You get someone who is deaf, hard of hearing, who is really good at reading lips. Obviously, that's out the window there. And so that can be pretty unfortunate for them. And I know there are masks that are being made that have kind of a window. They're putting like a see-through window across there where those who are deaf might still be able to read lips. But it makes things more difficult in that respect. And so accessibility in many ways is hindered by the mask. Whether it's helpful or whether it's not, you can do your research on that. I've got my own views and thoughts on that, apart and separate from what I am discussing. But this is definitely, an unfortunate consequence when these mask orders are put in place. And we live in a town right now where the mask order is in place. Unless you are exercising or you can social distance, or certain activities that they've given, you're required to wear a mask in public. And it is something that I don't think, they say if you have breathing problems, that's one thing, but they don't take into consideration some of the other difficulties that it creates. And it's not always the mask that I'm wearing that creates the problem. Like I said, sometimes it's because others are wearing the mask that can create some problems for me and others who are blind or visually impaired. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, and I know a lot of folks out there that get upset when someone's not wearing a mask, and then there are others who think that the world has gone crazy, but that it's even worse because of the mask ordinances that are out there. But that's kind of a perspective, I guess, from a blind or visually impaired individual that is really struggling with this, because I don't like it. I don't like it for the reasons that I mentioned, and that's enough for me not to like it. I've become so dependent upon other senses, and it is a hindrance. It is a hindrance in the work that I do, and in a lot of things that I'm engaged in. And so again, that's just something I thought I'd throw out there and let folks kind of think about and ponder on when it comes to the things that are happening with these mask ordinances. Now, there are some pretty cool ones. I will give some folks credit for being creative with their masks. My wife came home and said that there was a lady wearing a mask that said, "If you touch me, your first lesson in karate is free." I thought that was great. That was really creative. And there are some other masks, that are pretty neat that people have gotten creative, not only making, but, decorating. Some of the ladies out there are kind of getting masks of the same material as some of the clothes they're wearing. So everything, is matching, and that's just neat that people are kind of running with it, rolling with it, I guess, in that respect. I always love the thin blue line mask that some folks are wearing, the American flag mask that some folks are wearing. You can missed me with the BLM crap, but the other stuff is pretty creative, and really loving that. So, but that's, so that's pretty interesting. That's pretty cool that folks are doing some of that, to kind of get through these things, especially with these ordinances that cities are putting into place. And with all that said, man, we have been firing up the grill, and it has been so good. I'll tell you what, man, we made some brisket the other night that was just, it turned out spectacular. We love smoking brisket. We really do. Like I said at the beginning, that's usually one of our most requested items when we do our catering. And when it comes to family, hey, if I'm going to be cooking something, if you're going to be coming over, whatever, what do you want? And most folks are wanting the brisket. So we had some folks visiting from out of town, and that's kind of surprised them, cooking a meal for them, and we stayed up and smoked a brisket overnight, and it was great. And I've been talking about going over the brisket recipe, and thought, this would be a good time to go ahead and do that. And I know right now sometimes brisket can be hard to find, but if you can find it, my recommendation right up front, first of all, is the whole packer, not just the flat, which is, fairly common for people to find. Now, if you can find just the point, it's not so common. A lot of folks have difficulty finding just the point of the brisket. If you can find it, I would just do points all day long, every day, every year. I love the point. That's my favorite part of the brisket. But for us, cost-wise, the most effective way for us to get by with doing the briskets is the whole packers. So you get the point and the flat together, coming in a cryovac package. And when you get the brisket, if it's not froze, I recommend buying the brisket 3 weeks before you plan on cooking it. Stick it in the fridge and let it wet age up to 21 days. Now, it can be, maybe you find out a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance, so you only get, 7 or 14 days. That's fine. But I would go up to 21 days. Some folks go as long as a month, 28 days. But probably the most I've gone is between 21 and 24 days, wet aging the brisket in the refrigerator in the cryovac. It's not absolutely necessary, but in the results that I've had, those briskets that I've been able to wet age have turned out the best. And everything else is the same, but that in and of itself seems to make a little bit of difference when it comes to just the tenderness, the melt in your mouth kind of texture that you get in smoking the brisket. So that's the first thing that I try to recommend to folks who ask, what's the secret, or what's one of the things you recommend with whole briskets, and that is buying the whole packer in the cryovac package, leave it in the package, stick it in the fridge up to 3 weeks before you open it, trim it, and smoke it. So that's the first thing that I would highly recommend. And of course, getting it out of the fridge the night or the morning that you're going to smoke it, and getting it trimmed up, letting it sit out, a couple of hours maybe, to kind of, not be so cold when handling, be able to trim the fat off, level everything out. That can be a little bit difficult for those who are blind or visually impaired. Generally, if it is really hard fat, not the soft, mushy kind of fat that you can feel, but if it's really a hard fat that you can tell when you feel the brisket, that I try to cut off. I try to get that all cut off and all trimmed off. And if I can, level out the fat, I don't do competition. So this isn't, where, you got to get everything just right and square everything off and make sure that the fat is even across the fat cap. I'm not so much worried about that, but I do want to get any big chunks kind of cut off when I'm doing my trimming. And after that, I rub it down with some grapeseed oil. and I use Lane's Barbecue Brisket Rub. Lane's is one of our partners. Lane's Barbecue, lanesbbq.com, LANESBBQ.com. Go and check them out. Their brisket rub is absolutely phenomenal. They've got all kinds of great rubs, all kinds of amazing sauces. Their sort of white sauce is awesome. If you love Alabama white sauce, I think you would love Lane's Barbecue's sort of white sauce as well. But we use the brisket seasoning. It's just called brisket. And so that's the seasoning that we use on our brisket. So we'll rub it down with some grapeseed oil, and we'll season it pretty heavily with the Lane's Barbecue brisket seasoning. And I'll let it set for an hour or two before it goes on the smoker. And so once that is set up, it's trimmed, it's seasoned, and it's setting out, kind of coming to room temperature, I get my Big Green Egg smoker fired up, and I obviously indirect cook, and I get it set to 275 degrees. I let the flame boss do its thing to tame the flame and set it to cruise control at 275 degrees indirect with the flame boss on the Big Green Egg. And of course, I've got the Fogo charcoal, lit. I will add a couple of chunks of pecan and a couple of chunks of peach wood together. Persimmon also works really well. Pecan and peach is my go-to, but every once in a while I'll switch it up and do pecan and persimmon wood. But those are probably my favorite woods for doing brisket. And so I'll get that going and let that come up to temperature at 275 degrees. And once it is ready, we're talking about probably a 7-hour cook, and this is anywhere from a 13 to 17 pound brisket that we generally are cooking, anywhere from 13 to 17 pounds of a whole brisket, and we put it on fat side up on the Big Green Egg, and I'll let it go for 4 hours, sometimes 4.5. And really right around that 4.5 hour mark. I'll just leave it on the egg. I don't monitor temperatures. I don't do anything else. At 275 degrees, I'll let her go 4.5 hours. And once that 4.5 hours come, I will go out and I will wrap it. Now I use foil. I've used the butcher paper. I've used foil, and I've found that if the bark has set well, that it really doesn't make that much a difference. I know folks think those are fighting words. Depending on who you talk to, there are some that swear by the butcher paper, some that, is like, well, I'm just going to use foil no matter what. I use foil. I'll use butcher paper. That's fine. I don't find much of a difference in the cooks that I have done when I've let that bark set. And usually that 4.5 hours really does a good job on getting that bark set on the briskets. So I'll get the bark set 4.5 hours. I'm wrapping the brisket, leaving it fat side up. I stick in a meat probe in the flat, and I put it back on the egg. And usually I'll bring that temperature to about 202 to 205 degrees internal temperature, which is another 3 hours, give or take. Sometimes it's 2.5, sometimes it's 3.5 to 4 hours. But that isn't the end. That's not the end all. It's not that, okay, we've reached 205 and so the brisket is done. What I like to do then is take that meat probe and I start just kind of pushing the meat probe, into the meat all over that flat and that point, making sure that there's no resistance anywhere in that brisket. And if there's any resistance at any point as I'm, kind of poking around with that meat probe in that brisket, when I find resistance, I put the meat probe right there where the most resistance was. I wrap it back up, close the lid of the egg and leave it on there and let it go for another, 15, 20, or maybe even 30 minutes. And then I'll go back and I'll check it again. I'll probe it again. And I'm looking for probe tender. I'm looking for that probe to slide through with no resistance, just like it's melted butter. And once that happens, and usually we're talking 7 hours total cook time, then I'll take it off. I'll stick it in a cooler or a Cambro wrapped up tight to stay warm and let it rest for an hour or two. And then it's ready to slice into. It's good to go. You can separate the point and flat at that time. You could do something with the burn ends from the point if you wanted to. But generally I just go ahead and get it sliced up. I cube up the point, like burn ends, slice the flat and just kind of mix it up when we're serving folks. And it's just amazing brisket. And you guys will not be disappointed with that technique. It doesn't have to take 20 hours, 18 hours to cook a whole packer brisket. A lot of guys like doing that. They like to, take that time at 225 degrees and just they enjoy that. And that's fine. You do that. You do you. But if you're thinking about, you want to do a brisket, but you don't want to take, 12 to 18 hours or more, the 275 degrees on a big green egg will get it done in 7 hours, 8 hours max. Sometimes even 6 hours and they're done. But again, that temperature is just kind of a guide to get ready to probe for tenderness. And usually around that 205 mark is when I'll start probing, and I'll usually let it go a little longer. So the internal temp might end up being in certain spots 209, 210 internal temp, depending on the brisket. But long as it is probe tender, then man, it is amazing. Melt in your mouth, just awesome. And for those who like a little bit of sauce, Lane's Barbecue's got that sort of white sauce that is just phenomenal with brisket. Absolutely love it. So give Lane's Barbecue a check at their website, lanesbarbecue.com. You will not be disappointed in any of the things that you try there. I mean, they've got stuff for fish, salmon, seafood. They've got pork rubs. They've got beef rubs. They've got their signature SPG type rub. Their sweet heat is amazing on chicken. They've just got all kinds of things. Lane does a lot of awesome things when it comes to those rubs. They have kind of a Pitmaster Elite series that they can put out. And they'll even do some combination with some others at times where they combine two different rubs together and just have an awesome creation there as well. So a lot of great stuff at lanesbarbecue.com. Really encourage you to check it out. They're a partner of ours with the packages we provide to veterans, first responders, and others who have suffered vision loss. And we use it constantly. We're always using it. It's the only rub we use on our brisket. Awesome stuff when it comes to steak, chicken, pork. We just really love it. We really do. And so recommend them highly. So again, lanesbarbecue.com is what we would recommend you check out. But give brisket a try. Let me know what you think. If you got questions about the brisket cook, it can be intimidating, and I understand that. I was intimidated the first time because you're dropping, $40 plus on a brisket, and folks are, that's a lot of money to have it go wrong. But if you're willing to just do it, to get past that fear, you'll find that brisket really isn't the intimidating piece of meat that most folks have let on for it to be. Just follow those simple steps and you will have an awesome meal. You'll have some awesome brisket, and you'll be hard pressed to find brisket at a restaurant that'll be any better. And I'm not just saying that because that's how I do it. I mean, I've learned these things from others. I've picked up on techniques and things from other folks I've learned, and I want to share with you as well. And so that's kind of what we do and what we've done to dial in our briskets. All right, folks, man, I appreciate everybody tuning in. I know we've got a lot of things upcoming. We've got some reviews of some pretty cool technology when it comes to things for the visually impaired that we're going to be talking about. Some other things that folks go through, blind and visually impaired, parents having to deal with their kids being schooled at home right now. That's something I think is on everybody's mind. And there's some other things that I think are really folks are really struggling with that we're going to be talking about in upcoming episodes. So stay tuned. Be sure and subscribe. Of course, check us out on YouTube at youtube.com/blindgrilling. We've got our Facebook page, facebook.com/blindgrilling. And be sure and subscribe, like, and share, and of course, let everybody know about Blind Grilling Experience podcast as well. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, if you're looking, you ain't cooking.